Brennath and Fenwyn left the heavy cloak of Tir Navan behind as they journeyed southward, the forest receding into open hills, the air now rich with sun-warmed grass and the first whispers of night. Fenwyn's laughter rang out as she kicked aside tufts of grass, letting out a contented sigh.
Feels different, doesn't it?
Brennath strode forward without pause.
It's the same land.
She spun in a slow circle, arms stretched wide.
No, it isn't. Not really. The trees hold you close and keep the world small. Here, the wind runs free.
She breathed in deeply.
No roots to snare you, no branches pulling at your cloak, just sky above, earth below.
Even open spaces bear scars.
He said, scanning the darkening horizon.
And no cover to camp.
They crested a hill, and ahead the land sloped gently downward before rising again to a higher ridge, crowned with weathered stone monoliths. Blackened by age and smoothed by wind, they stood as sentinels of a world long forgotten. The runes etched into their surfaces were nearly lost to time, their meaning obscured by cracks and lichen. The wind moved between them, whispering in a tongue too old for even the Fae to recall. Brennath exhaled.
Kaeltharion. We'll make camp there.
Night had fallen swiftly, swallowing the last traces of gold on the horizon. As they neared the summit, a sound rose on the wind, a slow, wandering tune played on a stringed instrument, not hurried nor joyful. A song to pass the time. Fenwyn's grin widened.
Music. That means company.
Brennath stopped just below the ridgeline.
We'll find another place.
Fenwyn was already moving.
Oh, stop it. What do you think they'll do? Chase us off with a song?
Brennath ground his teeth in frustration.
Hello, do you mind if we join you?
A handful of figures stirred in the firelight. Fae lounged across the weathered stones, their cloaks wrapped tight against the evening chill. Some reclined against the rock faces, others sprawled across the flat tops as if the ancient markers were their beds. The source of the music, a slender, grey-haired Fae, glanced up, his fingers halting on the strings of his lyre just long enough to gesture lazily at the open space by the fire. Fenwyn grinned and all but dragged Brennath forward. The night settled in, and the gathered Fae made no effort to lower their voices. They spoke in easy tones, spinning tales as they drank from carved wooden flasks passed around, the air rich with spice and fermented fruit. Fenwyn slotted herself among them with ease, naturally, her laughter threading through the cool night air. Brennath sat at the edge of the gathering, half-shadowed beneath one of the taller stones, listening but silent. Then, from somewhere beyond the hills, a howl rose. It was distant but unmistakable, long, mournful and hungry. The conversation stilled.
They've been heard more often these nights,
the lyrist murmured. His fingers moved idly, as if giving voice to unspoken thoughts. A Fae across from him frowned.
Wolves.
The lyrist shook his head.
Not wolves.
Fenwyn leaned forward, resting her arms on her knees.
You're not talking about the Kusith, are you? They're nothing to fear.
The lyrist gave a dry chuckle.
If only it were the Kusith. No, I believe what we are hearing is the Dulvarg.
Brennath's gaze lifted. The name was old, a whisper from the past. One of the younger Fae, who had been dozing against a stone, stirred.
I thought they were just a story.
The lyrist plucked a discordant note.
Stories do not survive the ages without a seed of truth at their core.
A broad-shouldered Fae, his cloak clasped with a bone pin, rubbed his jaw.
Last time they were seen, really seen, was during the Mount Aurivane.
He swirled the flask in his hands, watching the firelight catch in the liquid.
I was just a leafling then, but I remember the stories. The elders swore they'd been eradicated. The Sylphaena paid in blood to see it done.
Fenwyn frowned.
The Sylphaena, the root-born ones. They were real.
Aye.
Another shifted by the fire, her voice distant, as if pulling from some half-buried memory.
stout as oak, clever as foxes. The land was in their bones. When the shadow beasts came down from the high places, it was the Sylphaenor who held them back. Not with swords, but with earth-binding rites. They bound the beasts beneath the stones, sealed them into the deep roots. They paid for it in blood. But their sacrifice ensured the Dolvarg would never walk this land again.
Brennath's gaze flickered to the monoliths, the wind whispering through their cracks. A long-limbed Fae laying atop a monolith pulled his cloak tighter.
Let the dead stay dead. If they come howling for blood again, they'll find no welcome here.
A murmur of assent passed through the gathering. Someone took the flask, drinking deep before handing it off, as if passing the burden of the conversation along with it. Brennath did not speak. The wind moved through the hills, carrying no further howls. Only the sound of embers shifting, of Fae who had outlived too many stories to fear them now. Yet still, Brennath listened. Beneath the glow of 100 lanterns, Al-Haddar trembled with firelight as its streets danced with shifting flames and shadows. It was the night of the last spark, a festival that had once celebrated the Jinn's mastery over flame and honored the fire that had been their birthright bestowed by Nuri. Yet time had worn down belief like wind against stone, and what was once sacred had become a flickering ember in a world that had long abandoned its warmth. At the city's heart, the Sunfire Pit roared with fierce, empty flames, a performance meticulously staged for a people who had forgotten the true meaning of fire. The Zul-Amar had surely paid handsomely to preserve the spectacle, maintaining only the illusion of tradition. At the gathering's edge, Zahirah stood with his arms folded, silently watching the embers twist in the night air. Within the pit, 2 Jinn circled each other with practiced precision, their blades wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, burning like cleaved embers against the dark. Each deliberate movement sent golden sparks spiraling upward, yet the display was devoid of reverence, a mere trick of light and movement, a cheap imitation for those clinging to echoes of a lost past. Once, the Jinn wielded fire as an extension of their very being, letting flames dance across their skin. Now, they played with it like children, fearful of being burned. Zahirah's jaw tightened as his gaze drifted away from the dying tradition and the indifferent crowd. Then, amid the controlled pyres, a subtle shift in the air caught his attention, a burning scent that was not part of the ritual. At first, it appeared as a faint glow at the edge of his vision, a flicker beyond the rooftops. But as the odor deepened, its true nature became unmistakable. Smoke, thick, black and rising against the night sky, drifted from the direction of his forge, twisting his stomach into knots. Without a moment's hesitation, he pushed past the lingering festival-goers and the startled voices behind him, his heart pounding as he raced toward the threat. He had been blind to the danger, lulled into complacency by Orinai's empty words. The heat of the festival fires faded behind him, replaced by an intensity wilder and hungrier, a promise of utter destruction. Rounding the final corner, his chest constricted with dread, his forge was aflame. The inferno devoured the building, tongues of fire licking at the sky as wooden beams groaned and crumbled like brittle parchment, consuming his home, his craft, his very life. Zahirah did not hesitate. He plunged into the blaze, the heat clawing at his skin and smoke filling his lungs like iron chains, driven by a singular purpose. Amid the chaos, he searched desperately, clawing through the wreckage for the one thing that could not be lost. His workbench lay overturned, its scarred surface and scattered tools attesting to the violence of the fire, while the walls trembled and the ceiling threatened collapse. And in the space where the Narite blade had once rested, there was nothing but emptiness. His jaw clenched and his fists tightened. This was no accident, no inadvertent warning. It was a message. A beam snapped above him, crashing down in a shower of sparks that forced him to stagger back, coughing and disoriented. The forge was lost. Then he heard it. Screams, distant and piercing, rising from the direction of the marketplace. Before his mind could fully register the sound, his body was already in motion. He tore himself from the ruin and ran toward the echoing cries. Tonight Al-Haddar burned. The last light of day clung weakly to the sky as Kaeltharion neared the base of Mount Aurivane. His breath was uneven, his limbs heavy with exhaustion, yet the oracle's words gnawed deeper than pain. You were meant to lose everything. Below, the valley burned with dusk's dying embers, yet what awaited him was not the solitude he expected, but desecration. Lucerius stood bound near a crumbling shrine, thick cords biting into his flanks. The stallion kicked heavily in defiance, but the bindings held firm. A muzzle clamped tightly over his mouth, preventing even his protest. 4 knights of the council stood around him, their armor pristine despite the dust of the road. The emblem on their tabard marked them as the Second Sigil, one of the council's most feared militant orders. These were not mere enforcers, they were hunters sent to collect a body. Kaeltharion's hands curled into fists. He was still half hidden among the outcroppings of stone at the base of the mountain, unseen for now, but it would not last. They had come for him.
Your horse-masters would flay you for binding an auric charger like a common plough beast,
he said coldly as he stepped into the clearing like a spectre. The knights turned at once, their movements crisp and disciplined. The captain tilted his head slightly, taking in Kaeltharion's presence without so much as drawing his sword.
Kaeltharion, lost son of the First Circle, by decree of the Radiant Council, you are to be taken. Kneel now and accept your fate.
Kaeltharion stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dirt.
You wear the sigil of the Second, yet you handle a warhorse like stable rats. Even your squires would be ashamed.
The captain's expression did not change.
This animal is to be claimed by the Order. You, however, will return in chains, if you still wish to walk. Defy us, and we will send your body instead.
Kaeltharion exhaled through his nose, steady and slow.
If you don't release him,
he said, voice low and sharp as flint,
I will tear your throats out with my bare hands.
A tense silence followed. One knight shifted, the captain did not.
You mistake the weight of your name, exile.
His voice was like steel, snapping in the cold.
You were once a blade in the council's hand. Now you are nothing but a shadowed past, better buried. You will return to the capital, and you will be unmade.
Kaeltharion's teeth clenched. He knew what that meant. Not execution, erasure. They would strip him of his name, his deeds, his existence in the world. By the time they were done, he would not even be a memory. Another silence stretched between them. Then, in the stillness, something flickered. A ripple of light passed through the clearing, not a tangible thing but a shimmer in the air, a distortion barely noticeable to the untrained eye. It was nothing. It was everything. It danced over the knight's armor, over Lucerius's bindings, and vanished as swiftly as it had come. The captain frowned, caught off guard by the presence. And in that moment, Kaeltharion moved. He was on them before they could react, driving his shoulder into the nearest knight and slamming him into the dirt. Before the man could recover, Kaeltharion's knee crashed into his exposed throat. A sickening crunch. The knight choked on his last breath. The captain swung his sword free, but Kaeltharion caught his wrist, twisting until he felt the snap of bone. Snatching the falling blade, he drove it through the knight's chest, steel punching through mail and flesh. The third knight's blade found its mark, carving deep into Kaeltharion's side. He gasped, vision flashing white with pain, but he turned into the attack, closing the distance. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Kaeltharion forced his knee against the knight's chest, grabbed his head, and twisted. With a snap, the body went limp. Dizzy and bleeding, he turned towards the sound of hooves. The fourth knight was already in full gallop, disappearing into the darkness. Breathing hard, he turned back to Lucerius, his hands trembling as he worked to undo the binds. The stallion let out a deep, shuddering breath as the muzzle fell away, nuzzling Kaeltharion's shoulder as if inspecting his injuries. His own blood dripped onto the ground as he reached for the clasps of his armor. One by one, he let the pieces fall, the sacred pauldrons, the silver-chased gauntlets, the chestplate that once bore the sigil of his station. He left them where they lay, discarded relics of a life that no longer belonged to him. By the time he mounted Lucerius, the last traces of sunlight had faded fully, leaving only the hush of night in its wake. The path ahead was uncertain, but for once it was his to make. Kaeltharion did not look back.